Hi, I'm Jo Truesdell, and my husband Huck and I are going to be opening Tide Pool Bookshop in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we were going to open in March, but with the pandemic and all, we have put that off. We're not going to open quite yet, but we decided that what we would do, because we're going to be having story times at the bookstore when we open, we thought, why not have a story time online on the website for now? And so that seemed like a great idea, as we'll do them from home. And a friend of mine, Jen, said, well, you should read a story by the dollhouse. And so that seemed like sort of a fun idea. And I actually have a great story to read about a dollhouse, actually about 2 dollhouses. So that'll be fun. But I thought what I would do is tell you a little bit about this dollhouse before I begin telling the story. This dollhouse was built in 1883 in Worcester, and it was built for my grandmother for her 5th birthday, and it has actually been used by 5 generations of my family. My grandmother first, of course, and then my mom and her sisters, and then my sister Molly and me, and then our son and my nephews, and then the 5th generation is one of my nephew's daughters, Teresa. So we've all enjoyed playing in this dollhouse over the years. Actually, my cat kind of likes to play in it as well. I've got a picture of Max. You may see him come around while we're reading the story. He loves to play in the dollhouse too, and even when the doors are closed, there's a window that is broken or that's missing, so he comes in the window. We always know when he's been there because his tail swishes around and he knocks everything off, so it's like, aha, Max has been there. But anyway, so I really loved playing in the dollhouse when I was little, and I didn't play with dolls that much, but so really what I liked to do was clean the dollhouse. And so I would take all the furniture out and clean, and then put all the furniture back. And that's how, of course, I did that so much that I got cleaning out of my system, so I don't clean my house as much as I used to clean the dollhouse. But I have a photograph of me. That's when I was probably maybe about 4 in that picture. And that's Missy, our dog Missy. And that's not Missy's water dish. That's actually a dish of soapy water that I was using to wash the dollhouse. So the book that I'm going to read is pretty special for a few reasons, actually. One is that a neighbor, Mrs. Dewey, gave it to me last year, or maybe 2 years ago, and it's what's called a first edition. So it's the first version of the story that was printed, and it was printed in 1906, so that's a long time ago, 114 years ago. And you can see that it's kind of, the binding is sort of coming apart a little bit. You can see how old it is, but Mrs. Dewey wrapped it up in a ribbon, so it won't fall apart, and so I keep that nice ribbon on it also. And but the other reason why I love this book is that I remember my grandmother reading this book to me when I was little, so it brings back lots of memories that way as well. So the story is called Racketty, Packetty House. and it's written by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I was reading up a little bit on Frances Hodgson Burnett, and what I learned is that she used to love to make up stories when she was little, and then she would have her dolls act out the stories. And that's something, of course, that we all, many people do with their dolls and their stuffed animals and whatnot, and their brothers and sisters. But the great thing is that she also wrote the stories down so that we get to enjoy them, which is really great. So I'm going to untie, if I can, I'm going to untie this ribbon. There we go. Awesome. You may see my cat Max coming by because he likes to play with ribbons also. He likes to play with dollhouse and he likes to play with ribbons. But I'm going to put this book right up front so that you can see it. Isn't that great? The illustrations in the book are really beautiful, and they're done by Harrison Cady, and they're just very sweet illustrations. So this book is told by the narrator of the story. The person who's telling the story is Queen Crosspatch, and she's the queen of the fairies, and so she's the one who's telling the story. And the story begins with Cynthia, a little girl named Cynthia, who is about to turn 8, and on her she has this her grandmother's dollhouse, and but on her 8th birthday she gets a brand new, very fancy dollhouse, and so the new dollhouse, she ends up enjoying playing with new dollhouse, and the old dollhouse, her grandmother's dollhouse, just becomes known as Racketty Packetty House, the title of the story. So there's a little introduction that the Queen of the Fairies, Queen Crosspatch, writes. So I'm going to read that to you. Now, this is the story about the doll family I liked and the doll family I didn't. When you read it, you are to remember something I am going to tell you. This is it. If you think dolls never do anything you don't see them do, you are very much mistaken. When people are not looking at them, they can do anything they choose. They can dance and sing and play on the piano and have all sorts of fun. But they can only move about and talk when people turn their backs and are not looking. If anyone looks, they just stop. Fairies know this. And of course, fairies visit in all the dolls' houses where the dolls are agreeable. They will not associate, though, with dolls who are not nice. They never call or leave their cards at a doll's house where the dolls are proud or bad-tempered. They're very particular. If you're conceited or ill-tempered yourself, you will never know a fairy as long as you live. Queen Crosspatch. And then the story begins. Now, the story is kind of long, so it'll probably take us about, I don't know, maybe 4 sessions to read it. So I'm going to read the first part right now. Racketty Packetty House. Racketty Packetty House was in a corner of Cynthia's nursery. And it was not in the best corner either. It was in the corner behind the door, and that was not at all a fashionable neighborhood. Racketty Packetty House had been pushed there to be out of the way when Tidy Castle was brought in on Cynthia's birthday. As soon as she saw Tidy Castle, Cynthia did not care for Rackety Packety House, and indeed was quite ashamed of it. She thought the corner behind the door quite good enough for such a shabby old doll's house, when there was this beautiful big new one built like a castle and furnished with the most elegant chairs and tables and carpets and curtains and ornaments and pictures and beds and baths and lamps and bookcases, and with a knocker on the front door and a stable with a pony cart in it at the back. Oh, the minute she saw it, she called out, "Oh, what a beautiful doll castle!" I'm going to show you a picture of that doll castle. I'm going to show you two pictures, because I'm going to show you first a picture of Cynthia with the Rackety Packety House, and then here is a picture of Tidyshire Castle. It does look like a castle, doesn't it? Oh my gosh. So Cynthia just said, "Oh, what a beautiful doll castle! What shall we do with that untidy old Rackety Packety House now? It's too shabby and old-fashioned to stand near it." In fact, that was the way in which the old doll's house got its name. It had always been called the doll's house before, but after that it was pushed into the unfashionable neighborhood behind the door, and ever afterwards, when it was spoken of at all, it was just called Rackety Packety House and nothing else. Of course, Tidy Castle was grand, and Tidy Castle was new and had all the modern improvements in it, and Rackety Packety House was as old-fashioned as it could be. It had belonged to Cynthia's grandmama, just the way my doll's house belonged to my grandmother. So it had belonged to Cynthia's grandmama, and had been made in the days when Queen Victoria was a little girl, and when there were no electric lights even in princesses' dollhouses. Cynthia's grandmama had kept it very neat, because she had been a good housekeeper even when she was 7 years old. But Cynthia was not a good housekeeper, and she did not recover the furniture when it got dingy, or repaper the walls, or mend the carpets and bedclothes, and she never thought of such a thing as making new clothes for the doll family, so that of course their early Victorian frocks and capes and bonnets grew in time to be too shabby for words. You see, when Queen Victoria was a little girl, excuse me, dolls wore frocks and long pantalettes, and boy dolls wore funny frilled trousers and coats, which it would almost make you laugh to look at now. But the Rackety Packety House family had known better days. And that's Queen Crosspatch speaking, I and my fairies had known them when they were quite new, and had been a birthday present, just as Tidy Castle was when Cynthia turned 8 years old, and there was as much fuss about them when their house arrived as Cynthia made when she saw Tidy Castle. Cynthia's grandmama had danced about and clapped her hands with delight, and she had scrambled down upon her knees and taken the dolls out one by one and thought their clothes beautiful. And she had given each one of them a grand name. "This one shall be Amelia," she said, "and this one is Charlotte, and this one is Victoria Leopoldina, and this one Aurelia Matilda, and this one Leontine, and this one Clotilda, and these boys shall be Augustus and Roland and Vincent and Charles Edward Stuart." For a long time, they led a very gay and fashionable life. They had parties and balls, and were presented at court, and went to royal christenings and weddings, and were married themselves, and had families, and scarlet fever, and whooping cough, and funerals, and every luxury. But that was long, long ago, and now all was changed. Their house had grown shabbier and shabbier, and their clothes had grown simply awful. and Aurelia Matilda and Victoria Leopoldina had been broken to bits and thrown into the dustbin, and Leontine, who had really been the beauty of the family, had been dragged out on the hearth rug one night and had had nearly all her paint licked off and a leg chewed up by a Newfoundland puppy, so that she was a sight to behold. As for the boys, Roland and Vincent had quite disappeared, and Charlotte and Amelia always believed they had run away to seek their fortunes because things were in such a state at home. So the only ones who were left were Clotilda and Amelia and Charlotte and poor Leontine and Augustus and Charles Edward Stuart. And even they had their names changed. After Leontine had had her paint licked off so that her head had white bald spots on it and she had scarcely any features, a boy cousin of Cynthia's had put a bright red spot on each cheek and painted her a turned-up nose and round saucer blue eyes and a comical mouth. He and Cynthia had called her Ridiculous instead of Leontine, and she had been called that ever since. All the dolls were jointed Dutch dolls, so it was easy to paint any kind of features on them and stick out their arms and legs in any way you like, and Leontine did look funny after Cynthia's cousin had finished. She certainly was not a beauty, but her turned-up nose and her round eyes and funny mouth always seemed to be laughing, so she really was the most good-natured looking creature you ever saw. There's a little picture of Ridiculous that I'm going to show you right here. You see her turned up nose and her smile and the red dots on her cheeks and her saucer eyes. She looks fun and very good-natured. Charlotte and Amelia, Cynthia had called Meg and Peg, and Clotilda she called Kilmanskeg, and Augustus she called Gustavus, and Charles Edward Stuart was nothing but Peter Piper. So that was the end of their grand names. The truth was, they went through all sorts of things, and if they had not been a jolly lot of dolls, they might have had fits and appendicitis and died of grief. But not a bit. If you will believe it, they got fun out of everything. They used to just scream with laughter over the new names, and they laughed so much over them that they got quite fond of them. When Meg's pink silk flounces were torn, she pinned them up and didn't mind in the least, and when Peg's lace mantilla was played with by a kitten and brought back to her in rags and tags, she just put a few stitches in it and put it on again. And when Peter Piper lost almost the whole leg of one of his trousers, he just laughed and said it made it easier for him to kick about and turn somersaults, and he wished the other leg would tear off too. You never saw a family have such fun. They could make up stories and pretend things and invent games out of nothing. And my fairies were so fond of them that I couldn't keep them away from the doll's house. They would go and have fun with Meg and Peg and Kilmanskeg and Gustavus and Peter Piper, even when I had work for them to do in Fairyland. But there, I was so fond of that shabby, disrespectable family myself that I never would scold much about them, and I often went to see them too. That is how I know so much about them. They were so fond of each other and so good-natured and always in such spirits that everybody who knew them was fond of them too. And it was really only Cynthia who didn't know them and thought them only a lot of old, disreputable-looking Dutch dolls, and Dutch dolls were quite out of fashion. The truth was that Cynthia was not a particularly nice little girl and did not care much for anything unless it was brand new. But the kitten who had torn the lace mantilla got to know the family and simply loved them all. And the Newfoundland puppy was so sorry about Leontine's pain and her left leg that he could never do enough to make up. He wanted to marry Leontine as soon as he grew old enough to wear a collar. But Leontine said she would never desert her family because now that she wasn't the beauty anymore, she became the useful one and did all the kitchen work and sat up and made poultices and beef tea when any of the rest of them were ill. And the Newfoundland puppy saw she was right, for the whole family simply adored Ridiculous and could not possibly have done without her. Meg and Peg and Kilmanskeg could have married any minute if they had liked. There were 2 cock sparrows and a gentleman mouse who proposed to them over and over again. There's a picture of the gentleman mouse and the 2 cock sparrows proposing to them, saying, "Will you marry me?" So the 2 cock sparrows and a gentleman mouse proposed to them over and over again. They all 3 said they did not want fashionable wives, but cheerful dispositions and a happy home. But Meg and Peg were like Ridiculous and could not bear to leave their families, besides not wanting to live in nests and hatch eggs. And Kilmanskeg said she would die of a broken heart if she could not be with Ridiculous, and Ridiculous did not like cheese and crumbs and mousy things, so she could never live together in a mouse hole. But neither the gentleman mouse nor the sparrows were offended, because the news was broken to them so sweetly, and they went on visiting just as before. Everything was as shabby and disrespectable and as gay and happy as it could be, until Tidy Castle was brought into the nursery, and then the whole family had rather a fright. And I think what we're going to do is stop right here, and the next time we can find out what that fright is. So I'm going to put my place marker right here, my bookmark right there, and I'm going to tie this all up. Let's see if we can get this all tied up again to keep it safe. Let's see. There we go. All set. And maybe I'll even close the dollhouse. There we go. Excellent. And then we'll be all ready for next time. See you then.